to a little mini seminar on short 2. We're going to be focusing on all of the 2s. We're doing form 2, we're thinking about 2 movements at a time, 2 body mechanics at a time, 2 applications, 2 different methods of execution. Short 2 introduces a lot of new concepts. It introduces moving forward, it introduces angles, but the most important one that I'm going to focus on today is that it introduces doing multiple motions at once. We had short 1 that's basically one motion. We had long 1 that's still basically one motion every time. Short 2 introduces us to the idea of 2 motions, but unlike long 2 where we have stance shifting, short 2 everything happens in one stance. This presents us with an interesting paradox that we're going to use as kind of thought experiment as we go forward. First move in short 2 is the opening of 5 swords, and it sort of lays out this problem for us. We have essentially 2 motions, a block and a chop, and I think a lot of the time we end up doing that block, chop. And there's nothing on that chop, that's just a hand motion. We can do some interesting studies in being loose and finding energy generation in small motions, but that's not really the point of the form, I think. Instead we have to ask, how can we generate power with a body mechanic, with that chop, even though we're not shifting our stance? 2 movements, 1, 2. 2 body mechanics. We have backup mass, we're driving into that, and we have rotation. How do we have rotation if we're not shifting our stance forward? We have that hip tension that we discussed in the other video. As we fall into that first stance, as we discussed last time, I'm generating tension in my hip that's compressing in that I can release out. I haven't shifted to a forward bow, but my stance expands. I'm throwing through this hip across to the shoulder, and I'm tense here and opening. 2 methods of execution. We can emphasize rotation, or we can emphasize backup mass. Ideally, I think when we practice this for, say, a test or a tournament, we combine those 2. But if we're using our kata as sort of study practices, we could do all of short 2 thinking about maximizing rotational energy, or we could do all of short 2 thinking about maximizing backup mass. If we do those 2 different studies and we combine them with all of our other studies that we've done in the 1s, where we're thinking about bringing everything together, about falling through our front leg, then we can generate both backup mass and rotation, and we can move into our stance centered and ready to move. Oh, that was garbage. 2 applications. Every technique in short 2 presents us with a problem. We're on the inside. Imagine a roundhouse coming here. Even if I stop that, he has his other hand and his back foot, which means I need to do something to stop him from striking with those as well. He's not just going to hang out there. That chop needs to have more on it than just a sort of arm bonk then, because I need to be checking his shoulder with it, or hitting him hard enough that it cancels that hand or that foot. We're going to see this in all of the techniques in 2. They present us with this problem that we don't actually want to be here. If I imagine their punch coming in, that's 1 step for them, and I block it, that's 1 step for me, and all of their weapons are available, all of my weapons are available. It's just a race to see who's faster. It's going to be me because I'm hitting with my front hand, but I don't like that race. This is why instead of thinking of it as 1, 2, we have to start thinking about everything in the 2s as 1 move. In addition to thinking about defensive applications, I also really like to think about offensive applications, which is not to say you just walk up to some stranger and short form to them in the face, but rather I'm thinking, how do I apply this in sparring? How do I apply this if I get there first in an exercise like Ring of Fire? That first block, of course, could always be a hammer fist. That's pretty uninteresting, I think, but it's there. Instead of thinking of for sparring, that opening motion can accomplish the same principle of stopping their weapon, even if they haven't activated their weapon yet. So if you can imagine somebody mirroring me here, I can use that initial motion to knock their hand aside and open up that chop, but it has to be backup mass into rotation for that to really matter or count for anything. Then there's a little extra question we can ask ourselves about almost all of the techniques in this form, which is, if we're doing doubles, why is this not a simultaneous motion? The answer for this first one, I think, is it really should be. We're just moving in and chopping. There's no need to bounce off that other arm if you can get there first. That first technique is, to my mind, a sort of thesis question of the rest of the form. How do we combine two different body mechanics in two different motions, and how do we apply those